So back in 1920, the Safety Board of Washington State actually issued this official report, and they declared the local forest products industry to be, quote, more deadly than war.
Wow, more deadly than war. That is a heavy label.
Right. And they were talking specifically about the logging camps of Aberdeen, Washington.
Oh, yeah. That area was notoriously rough.
Exactly. I mean, it was a place totally defined by like giant falling timber, massive unshielded saws, and just catastrophic physical danger every single day.
And what's wild is that 60 years later, that exact same town birthed a teenager who would basically channel all that localized, multi-generational trauma into, well, the loudest, most seismic musical revolution of the 1990s.
Which is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today we are looking at the intensely unglamorous pre-fame origins of Nirvana.
Yeah, and to do this, we are pulling from an incredible stack of primary sources. We've got deeply personal journal entries, vintage concert flyers, handwritten track lists, and some really raw book excerpts.
We are specifically zeroing in on the timeline leading up to their 1989 debut album, Bleach. Because, if you really dig into these documents, the whole pristine mythology of the rock god who just, falls from the sky, it completely shatters.
That really does.
You start to realize that long before the MTV Unplugged Cardigans and the massive stadium tours, there was this profoundly messy, desperate, and just entirely human struggle just to be heard.
Absolutely. The documents force us to look at the actual mechanics of how a cultural icon is forged. I mean, you cannot understand the sheer abrasive force of that early music without first understanding the intently specific, isolating geography that trapped them.
Because Aberdeen is, 2 hours away from Seattle geographically?
Yeah, about 2 hours. But economically and culturally, it might as well have been on another planet.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because you have to picture Aberdeen not just as a small town, but essentially as a cultural Faraday cage.
A Faraday cage, I like that.
Yeah, it actively blocked out all the polished, synthesized pop signals coming from Los Angeles or New York. It trapped this kid in an echo chamber with nothing but the heavy, droning noise of the lumber mills, relentless rain, and, local sludge bunk.
Right.
The environment was just actively hostile to the cultivation of anything delicate or artistic.
And the source texts paint a really vivid psychological profile of a town that was just built for hard labor and hard living. The physical danger of the mills translated directly into a heavy psychological toll on the community?
Yeah, the records showed disproportionately high rates of alcoholism, domestic violence, and suicide.
It had this cinematic, almost lawless underbelly to it. Back in 1952, Look magazine actually dubbed Aberdeen a hot spot against sin.
A hot spot against sin.
Yeah, because the downtown was notorious for its brothels, which were largely run by this famous madam named Nellie Curtis.
Oh, right, Nellie Curtis.
She literally wielded more actual political power than the town's elected officials. During World War II, the military actually blacklisted the town entirely.
Wait, really? Off limits?
Completely off limits. If a serviceman went there in uniform, the military police would just arrest him on sight.
That is insane.
Yeah.
So, knowing that grim, rusted-out backdrop makes Kurt Cobain's actual early childhood feel almost surreal?
It is a massive contrast, yeah.
But he was born in 1967. His dad, Don, was a mechanic making about $6,000 a year, and his mom, Wendy, was only 19.
Right, very young parents.
And they lived in this microscopic 300-square-foot shack that literally had a half address because it was just shoved behind another house. But despite all that, as a young kid, Kurt was shockingly well-adjusted.
He really was.
The photos and school records show a kid wearing Izod polo shirts. He played snare drum in the school marching band. And in junior high, the school paper actually voted him Meatball of the Month.
Meatball of the Month.
Ah.
And in that same school paper, he listed his favorite song as Don't Bring Me Down by Electric Light Orchestra. Yeah. And his favorite band was Meatloaf. It is an incredible juxtaposition. You have the future pioneer of grunge, the ultimate anti-establishment figure, fully embracing the most theatrical, produced 70s stadium rock imaginable.
It's so funny to picture. But that seemingly idyllic bubble violently popped in the 5th grade when his parents divorced.
That was a fracture.
He explicitly pointed to that breakdown in his family unit as the exact moment his signature angst really materialized. He lost his anchor. He felt this deep, abiding sense of betrayal, which spawned a profound rootlessness.
He started bouncing between his parents' houses, eventually drifting to friends' couches. and he really just retreated entirely into a heavily guarded internal world.
And that retreat inward is where the art begins to take shape, right?
Exactly, but it's also where his internal struggles manifest into something much darker. The journals from this period are incredibly revealing. He starts documenting this disturbing incident, a vaguely sexual encounter he had with a developmentally disabled girl.
Yeah, those entries are tough to read.
They really are. The journal entries express an overwhelming, just crushing sense of self-loathing and shame. He writes about his absolute disgust, not just at the situation, but at himself for taking advantage of her.
But the way he processes that trauma is the real story here.
Definitely.
He writes this elaborate narrative in his journal, claiming the police were actively investigating him for the incident, and that he only escaped arrest because, by pure luck, his photo hadn't been printed in the school yearbook.
What's fascinating here is that there is absolutely zero police record of this ever happening.
None at all.
None. And nobody in his life corroborates the investigation either. We are basically seeing a teenager acting as his own storyteller. He's actively compartmentalizing his shame by building a novelistic myth around it.
Wow.
Yeah, long before he was writing songs for a mass audience, he was taking his own trauma and exaggerating it into this larger-than-life outlaw narrative.
I have to push back on that a little bit, though, or at least ask where we draw the line. Like, how much of this dark, brooding persona was a genuine reflection of agonizing internal pain, and how much was just a teenager consciously playing a character to build an armor against a town where he simply didn't fit in?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because the performative darkness really escalated. He had a family history heavily shadowed by suicide, a great-grandfather, and 2 uncles. And at 15 years old, Kurt films a home movie titled Kurt Commits Bloody Suicide, where he fakes slashing his wrists with a torn pop can.
The line between genuine pain and performative armor was entirely blurred for him. The genetic predisposition to mental health struggles, the crushing depression, the clinical alienation, those things were undeniably real.
Right.
But instead of letting that pain destroy him silently, he weaponized it. Music became the delivery system for both his authentic suffering and his calculated myth-making.
So how did he actually get started with the music part?
Well, at 14, he acquires this beat-up used guitar and starts learning what they called butt rock in Aberdeen AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, just basically hacking his way through Stairway to Heaven.
So that classic rock foundation was there. But the real chemical reaction didn't happen until the summer of 1983, right? In a grocery store parking lot.
Yes, the Melvins show.
He goes to see the local punk band, the Melvins, playing a free show on the asphalt. And he literally wrote in his journal that he had finally found, quote, the promised land and his special purpose.
The Melvins were the absolute catalyst because they completely deconstructed his idea of what a band had to be.
He didn't need a stadium or a massive light show.
Exactly. The Melvins took the sludgy, down-tuned, heavy tempos of Black Sabbath and injected them with the raw, aggressive speed and DIY ethos of hardcore punk.
Which is a total revelation for him.
It really was. They showed him that volume and attitude could compensate for a lack of technical mastery or financial backing. And from that parking lot epiphany onward, his dedication became almost monastic.
He just went all in.
He fully leaned into the transient lifestyle, too. He started claiming he was homeless, dropping out of high school, and literally sleeping on the porch of the Melvins drummer, Dale Crover.
And he eventually relocated to Olympia, which was entirely supported by his hardworking girlfriend at the time, Tracy Mirander.
Right. Tracy was crucial in this period.
She paid the rent and bought the groceries so he could basically sit in the apartment and do nothing but paint, write in his journals, and play guitar all day.
It was a singular obsessive focus, and it led directly to his first rudimentary attempts to actually get his sound on magnetic tape.
Right, the Atmari tapes.
Yeah, those early tapes were a masterclass in making something out of nothing. In December 1985, an 18-year-old Kurt travels up to his Aunt Mari's house in Seattle.
And he brings Dale Crover along.
He brings Dale, and they record this incredibly crude demo. Because they lack proper equipment, the sources actually note that on some tracks, Kurt is literally beating on a suitcase with sticks to simulate a drum kit.
A suitcase. And he christened this first project Fecal Matter.
Such a teenager name.
Oh, totally. Oh. He even drew a charming logo featuring steaming feces. The lyrical themes were exactly what you'd expect from a deeply alienated teenager trying to shock his way out of obscurity.
Yeah, an absolute obsession with anatomy, bodily functions, digestion, and reproduction.
It was pure punk rock provocation.
It was a deliberate attempt to be as abrasive as possible. Yet if you listen to the audio sources, they reveal something really crucial.
What's that?
Underneath all the distortion, the suitcase drums, and the lyrics about bodily fluids, his vocal poise was already staggering. He possessed this innate, raspy melodicism. He was singing about garbage, but he was singing it with the cadence of a pop star.
That's so true. He had the voice and the vision, but he desperately needed a rhythm section that could anchor his frantic energy. And enter Krist Novoselic.
Yes.
Krist was a couple of years older, working at the local Burger King in Aberdeen. Kurt had been trying to get Krist's attention for months, repeatedly slipping him the fecal matter cassette until Krist finally listened to it.
And Krist was the vital missing ingredient. He had a much wider, more eclectic record collection, bringing in influences outside of just pure punk. Plus, he had a biting, sarcastic sense of humor that perfectly matched Kurt's cynicism. But most importantly, his bass playing provided a massive, heavy, low-end groove that really filled out the sonic space, which allowed Kurt's guitar to just float and scream over the top.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because if you look at how Kurt managed this band in the early days, it is exactly like watching a chaotic startup founder.
Oh, that is a great comparison.
He is fiercely, relentlessly ambitious about the product demanding they rehearse every single day, furious if anyone is late or uncommitted. But as a manager, he is completely terrified of having an awkward conversation with human resources.
His conflict avoidance was legendary, particularly when it came to drummers.
Oh, the drummer carousel.
With the revolving door of them, Aaron Burkhardt, Dave Foster, eventually Chad Channing.
The Dave Foster firing is the ultimate example of this startup founder pathology. Kurt never actually pulled Foster aside to tell him it wasn't working out. He just stopped calling him.
Just ghosted him.
Completely. He started secretly practicing with Chad Channing. Foster only realized he was no longer in the band when he picked up a copy of The Rocket, a local Seattle music paper, and saw an advertisement for an upcoming Nirvana show featuring a different drummer.
It's a breathtaking level of passive aggression.
It really is.
It was entirely dysfunctional. But that desperate, scrappy ambition, that constant, ruthless search for the exact right sonic lineup, finally pushed them to take a massive financial gamble.
Because they realized that playing local keggers in neighboring towns like Raymond was a dead end.
Right. I mean, at those Raymond shows, they were forced to play Led Zeppelin's Heartbreaker just to appease the hostile drunk loggers.
They needed a professional calling card.
Exactly. And that realization brings us to a really pivotal date, January 23, 1988.
Kurt spots an advertisement in the back of The Rocket for a studio called Reciprocal Recording.
And the main selling point, a dirt cheap rate of just $20 an hour.
Which was huge because you have to remember the economic reality here, they are completely broke.
Penniless. So Kurt, Krister, and Dale Crover, who actually stepped in on drums just for this session, they carpool up to Seattle in a friend's pickup truck.
And the source text describes this vehicle as looking like a prop from the Beverly Hillbillies.
Yes. The back of the truck had a shingle-covered camper shell bolted to it, complete with a working wood-burning stove inside.
I can't even picture that.
They literally pulled up to a Seattle recording studio with a chimney spewing wood smoke out of the back of a pickup truck.
And then inside the studio, the producer, a guy named Jack Endino, is so unfamiliar with these scruffy kids from the coast that he looks at the booking sheet and actually misspells Kurt's name.
Yeah, he wrote it down as Kurt Cobain, C-O-V-A-I-N.
Oh, good.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this $20 an hour session demonstrates how extreme financial constraints actually forge a genre-defining sound.
Because they couldn't afford to endlessly overdub or polish the tracks.
Exactly. The lack of budget acted as a creative pressure cooker. They recorded 10 full songs in just 4 hours.
4 hours.
Kurt paid the $152 bill in literal cash. And because time was money, Kurt recorded his searing, throat-shredding vocals in a single, adrenaline-fueled take.
Just one take, and you can really hear the urgency on the tapes. It's the emergence of his unique, unsettling songwriting voice, especially on the track Floyd the Barber.
Oh, that track is wild.
It takes the wholesome, innocent small town of Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show and twists it into this dark, claustrophobic, lynching nightmare.
So they finish the session, they pack up their gear, and they immediately rush south for a gig in Tacoma. But right as they were loading out, Endino asked if he could run off a quick copy of the 8-track master tape for his own personal collection.
And that specific cassette tape became legendary in Seattle music lore as the Dale demo.
Right. Endino was so impressed by the raw power of the recording that he passed his copy along to Jonathan Poneman, who is the co-founder of Sub Pop Records.
And Poneman listened to Kurt's ferocious vocal roar on a track called If You Must, and he was instantly sold. Stop and think about the terrifying butterfly effect of that moment.
It's wild to consider.
If Jack Endino hadn't casually asked to make a personal copy of that tape before they drove away, the biggest, most influential rock band of the 1990s likely never gets discovered. They just fade back into the damp obscurity of Aberdeen, playing cover songs at dive bars.
The serendipity really is staggering. But getting the attention of Sub Pop was only the first hurdle. The real culture clash occurred when these isolated, fiercely independent outsiders actually had to sit across a table and negotiate the reality of the music business with Seattle record executives.
And it resulted in one of the most awkward business meetings in music history.
Oh, absolutely.
They meet Jonathan Poneman at a trendy coffee shop on Capitol Hill in Seattle, and the juxtaposition is just glaring. Krist shows up aggressively drinking straight from a bottle of wine.
In a coffee shop.
Right. And Kurt is intensely nervous, withdrawn, and barely even speaking. But despite the friction, they agree to a handshake deal to record and release a single.
But you might assume that signing a deal with a heavily hyped Seattle indie label meant Kurt finally had financial backing.
Which wasn't the case at all.
Not even close. The reality was almost comical. Sub Pop's financial situation was so bleak and they were so deeply in debt that Bruce Pavitt, the other co-founder of the label, actually had to pick up the phone and call Kurt.
Oh, no.
He had to ask the kid who was recently sleeping on porches and living off his girlfriend's wages if he could front the label $200 just to cover the studio time.
It completely shatters the illusion of the glamorous record deal. And the compromises didn't stop at the finances either. They bled directly into the creative process.
Right, because Sub Pop was struggling to stay afloat. They couldn't risk releasing a sludgy, inaccessible punk song as an introduction. They needed a hook.
So they forced Nirvana to record a cover song for their debut single. They chose Love Buzz, originally by a psychedelic Dutch rock band named Shocking Blue.
And Kurt was furious. He viewed himself as an authentic punk artist, and being mandated by a label to release a pop cover as his introduction to the world felt like an immense betrayal of his principles.
But he ultimately acquiesced to the business reality, though his retaliation was pretty swift.
Oh, yeah. The B-side they recorded for that single was an original track called Big Cheese. And that song was a direct, sarcastic, biting jab at what Kurt perceived as the dictatorial, judgmental posturing of the Sub Pop executives.
So the label finally releases the Love Buzz single in the fall of 1988. But Sub Pop's business model was based on an artificial scarcity concept called the Singles Club.
Right, they only pressed 1,000 copies of the record.
It was an incredibly limited release, and this limitation sets up one of the most poignant, revealing moments in this entire chronological deep dive for you to consider.
Such a great story.
Kurt takes one of those rare copies of his very first record, gets in his car, and drives up to KCMU.
Now, KCMU was a tiny college radio station operating out of the University of Washington. Its broadcast signal was so notoriously weak that it barely reached beyond the campus dormitories.
But Kurt physically drops the vinyl off at the station, walks back out to his car, sits behind the steering wheel, and turns the dial to KCMU. And he waits.
He just sits there.
He sits there for hours, staring at the radio, just hoping the college DJ will put his record on the turntable.
But the hours pass, and the station plays everything else. They completely ignore his record.
So Kurt Cobain, the architect of 90s alternative apathy, gets out of his car, walks down the street to a public payphone, drops a quarter in the slot, intentionally disguises his voice, and calls the DJ to request his own song.
That is just incredible.
30 minutes later, the opening bass line of Love Buzz finally crackles over the Seattle airwaves.
This raises an important question, though. Why did a kid who built his entire identity around being a hardcore punk purist, a guy who vocally despised quote-unquote careerist rock bands, care so intensely about a single spin on a microscopic college radio station that he had to call it in himself?
It's a contradiction.
The inescapable conclusion is that it was pure, unadulterated, burning ambition. He did not stumble into global fame by accident. He systematically willed himself out of Aberdeen and into the spotlight. He wanted it desperately.
So, what does this all mean? For you listening, when you strip away the mythology and look at the actual source documents, it is a profound reminder that beneath the heavy, sludgy, thrift store apathy that the media later packaged as the grunge movement, there was a desperate, painful desire to be heard.
Yeah.
It was about clawing your way out of a town that was built to break you and forcing the world to acknowledge your existence.
The slacker aesthetic was a carefully curated, brilliant illusion. Behind the scenes, the reality was relentless networking, ruthlessly firing bandmates to perfect the sound, fronting the cash for your own studio time, and literally calling payphones to manipulate radio play. The ambition was always the engine driving the art.
We've traced a massive and probable arc today. I mean, from a 300-square-foot shack in a logging town defined by its casualty rates, through the chaos of beating on a suitcase in an aunt's living room, to that incredibly human, lonely moment waiting by a payphone in Seattle just to hear your own voice on the radio.
The unvarnished truth of how a band actually fights its way onto tape is just endlessly more fascinating than the lightning bolt myth.
It really is. But before we sign off, we want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to mull over on your own. We spent a lot of time discussing how fiercely Kurt resented Sub Pop for forcing Nirvana to record a catchy pop cover like Love Buzz for their very first release.
Right.
But consider the alternative. What if the label had caved? What if Sub Pop had allowed Nirvana to release one of their aggressively abrasive, bodily function-obsessed, sludgy originals instead?
That's a great what if.
Would the undeniable generational melodic genius of Kurt Cobain have remained buried under all that intentional noise? Would they have ever caught the ear of the wider world, or would they have remained just another forgotten, uncompromising punk band playing to empty rooms in former adult movie theaters? It's the ultimate tension between artistic purity and the mechanics of actually getting heard. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. Keep digging, keep questioning the mythology, and we will catch you on the next one.